Okay, joining us is the World Wrestling Federation champion, the cause of Hulkamania, Mr. Hulk Hogan.
There are no two ways about it, no real room for debate. Hulk Hogan is one of the most culturally significant pro wrestlers to have ever laced up his boots. And beyond that, is one of the most recognisable faces of the 20th century in the United States. Leading the charge as the face of the WWF, as Hulkamania ran wild and brought in an exciting new combination of pro wrestling athleticism and Hollywood celebrity. Hulk Hogan, adorned in his classic yellow and red attire, became a household name throughout his prestigious, award-studded career. He made the transition from the wrestling ring to the silver screen and maintained a presence as a notable public figure for over 4 decades. Beloved by millions around the globe for his heroic antics and succession of high-caliber victories throughout the 80s and 90s, Hulk Hogan, even today, remains one of the all-time most popular performers in pro wrestling history, and with a wrestling career which saw him selling out arenas around America and selling truckloads of merchandise, as well as signing numerous endorsement and advertising contracts, it's safe to say that Terry Bollea, the man behind the legend, has reaped the rewards of his success. But in the modern day, as stories continue to surface online via social media and through tell-all autobiographies, the shine that once surrounded this immortal figure has begun to wear off.
Ladies and gentlemen, Hulk Hogan!
The international superstar born Terry Bollea was recently seen by millions in a different light.
Okay, maniacs, here we go. We were not the most liked guys in the dressing room. We had a ton of heat with everybody.
In a very short amount of time, and financially I was devastated. I've had a rough couple of years. I've had some really crazy years.
The WWE broke ties with you. Did you expect that was going to happen?
No, I didn't.
Oh, hell yes.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? He's Hulk Hogan. You don't get to be Hulk Hogan without knowing how to work the game.
I want to look at why, with such a legitimately impressive and almost unmatched history within the pro wrestling business, with so many excellent stories to tell and achievements to be proud of, does Terry Bollea seem to always crave more? Jim Cornette said, "Wrestling is all about good lies and bad lies. The bad lies come from the bookers, the promoters, and the people that underhandedly wanted people to do stuff that might not be in their best interest because they wanted them to do it. The good lies are all the stories that the guys used to tell in the locker room when they'd walk in, because that's all you had to do. You didn't have a TV in the locker room, there was no cell phone, there was no internet. You sat and stared at each other's Peters and told ridiculous stories." Hogan was at the peak of his popularity after slamming Andre in the main event of WrestleMania 3, but that success had come at a huge cost for both the men involved. Hogan said, "When I wrestled Andre the Giant at the time, he was standing 7'4" and weighed over 800 pounds. When I slammed him, I tore every muscle in my lower back." And Andre died a few days after the match. Two men given it their all, with one goal in mind: to entertain us as wrestling fans and leave us with a moment which will stand out in our memories for a lifetime. All the while, Hogan was put out of action for a year due to the horrific injuries in his back, and Andre had suffered such brutal internal damage from the first ever body slam he received that 6 days later he sadly passed away. There's just one problem. None of what Hogan said here is true. Not only was it not the first time Andre the Giant had been body slammed, but it wasn't even the first time Hogan had achieved the feat. It wasn't even the first time Hulk had slammed Andre that month, as the pair had faced off in several practice matches at untelevised house shows in preparation for the big event. Andre didn't ever weigh 800 pounds, even at his heaviest, and by WWF at the time was billed at 500 pounds, which is still probably a dramatisation. But even if not, still 300 pounds short of how Hulk remembers the moment. And, I think most disturbingly, Andre didn't die shortly after WrestleMania 3. Well, in terms of the length of the universe perhaps, but I don't think that's what Hulk was referring to. Andre the Giant lived for 6 more years after WrestleMania 3, and I'm not too sure why Hogan would lie about this specific point. Was it to make his body slam seem all the more devastating? Was he implying that he brought about the downfall of a man who he claimed was his close friend? Continued his feud throughout the year with Andre, the pair both forfeiting a match for the WWF title when they attempted to use chairs to attack one another. Andre eventually beat Hogan for the belt via underhanded tactics and immediately handed the belt to Ted DiBiase in return for a large chunk of cash. This was seen as an unacceptable move for the new WWF champion, and thus the belt became vacant, with a tournament to be held to crown a new top man in the company. Andre versus Hogan had happened earlier in the night. Yes, but if you look in their eyes, man, have you seen the fear in all those little Hulksters? They realise that when I get Andre the Giant cinched up in a launch position, when I slam him through the Trump Plaza, brother, from New York down to Tampa, Florida, the fault line is going to break off. Even with Randy Savage in the main event, Hogan seemingly needed to still be the lasting image of the show, the man who closed out the final moments of the event and was still to be seen as the headliner, who typically goes on last. Hogan, along with Andre, were the two men featured on the event's poster and subsequent covers of the VHS release, but seemingly this still wasn't enough for Hogan. It's the main event of the evening, the shining pinnacle of Randy Savage's career. Glitter, neon, Miss Elizabeth, the works. After making his way through the tournament for the vacant WWF title, Randy Savage faced off against Ted DiBiase in the final. A new hero for the fans to get behind. What could possibly spoil this perfectly orchestrated moment of classic wrestling history? Hogan. He comes to the ring, jumps in to aid Randy Savage with a steel chair, steals the limelight as always, and takes away from what could have been the most important moment in the whole of the Macho Man's lineage. After his victory, Hogan stays in the ring to celebrate with Savage and Miss Elizabeth in what was supposed to be their moment. And as Hogan seemingly refused to share the spotlight with anyone, you can see the disappointment on Savage's face. Also, as an aside, according to Hogan, Andre died shortly after his slam at WrestleMania 3 the previous year, right? So who was the giant in the ring opposite the Hulkster this year? A spooky mystery which nobody will ever truly get to the bottom of, or simply a lie. You decide. Next year, 1989, Hogan needed a way to stay at the top of the wrestling card. He and Randy Savage were both faces, so he couldn't win the belt directly off of him. Under the rules of kayfabe booking at the time, Savage wasn't dropping the title anytime soon, so Hulk forced his creative control card and created the Mega Powers, a tag team with Hogan and Savage, thus keeping Hogan in the main event each night next to the title and relevant. All great moves for his business, but all this did was overshadow Randy Savage, take away from his attention and force Hogan's way onto the screen anytime Randy was around, something that seemed to be a regular occurrence throughout the two men's careers. Throughout the year, the Mega Powers were the most popular segment on any WWF show, and for good reason. Both Hogan and Savage were in the prime of their careers, and their intensity and chemistry on screen made every single appearance a must-see. The pair spent the year facing off and defeating heel tag teams, whilst also participating in their own personal feuds as singles competitors. Randy Savage's longtime valet and real-world wife got caught in the middle. Hogan began to insist that she accompanied him to the ring for his matches, which began to brew jealousy from Savage. When on several occasions Miss Elizabeth was ringside supporting Hogan, she was put in danger, something which the Macho Man blamed entirely on his Mega Powers teammate. In February, during a tag match, Savage was thrown from the ring and awkwardly landed on Miss Elizabeth, causing her apparent serious injuries. Before he could regain his composure, Hogan had swooped in and came to the aid of the fallen valet, carrying her to the backstage area where she received medical attention. Savage believed it was his duty to care for his spouse and that Hogan had overstepped the line. With the Macho Man left in the ring to now take on two opponents, Hogan continued to loom over the unconscious Miss Elizabeth backstage. When she finally awoke, she implored Hulk to return to the ring and aid her husband Randy Savage. However, clearly furious at what had just happened, as Hogan made his way back to the match and attempted to tag in, Savage slapped him across the face and walked out, leaving Hulk to finish the bout. As soon as the match ended, Hogan rushed back to confront Savage. The pair embroiled in a heated argument before the Macho Man claimed Hogan was jealous of his title reign and lusting after Miss Elizabeth. Filled with anger, Savage, clutching the WWF belt, swung at Hogan and sent him crumpling to the ground, following up with wild punches before the officials could step in to break the pair apart. Later, Hulk challenged the Macho Man for the WWF belt at WrestleMania 5 as the Mega Powers exploded. As the two came face to face in the main event, there was clear hatred in both men's eyes. The match saw Hogan performing his usual routine, with Savage applying a more vicious moveset throughout, attacking Hulk's neck and throat with elbows. The finish of the match came as Miss Elizabeth, who had chosen to remain neutral during the event, was ushered from ringside as Macho Man retained the advantage in the bout. He landed a perfect elbow from the top onto Hogan, who immediately jumped back to his feet, threw some punches, landed a big boot and the leg drop to win the match and his second WWF title. In the 1990 Royal Rumble, the man of the hour was Mr. Perfect. He talked the talk and truly backed it up every step of the way. His in-ring style was more technical and graceful than Hogan's. He was in better physical shape and begun to become one of the top stars in the company. He was getting a major push towards stardom and set to be the perfect winner of the Rumble. Vince gave the go-ahead and plans were set in place. Mr. Perfect would give the performance of his life and earn the respect of any doubters on his way to winning the Rumble and eventually the WWF title at WrestleMania, until, in the last minute, the plans were changed by Hogan backstage, and instead of a fresh new face for the company, Hogan came in at number 25 and started dumping everyone out of the ring. Mr. Perfect and the Hulk were the last two, and the crowd were excited to see their new favourite wrestler champion the legend. Mr. Perfect had been undefeated for almost a full year up until this match, with real momentum behind him. He was an amazing athlete and an up-and-coming star. But no, Hogan, the Hulkster, threw Mr. Perfect over the top rope to claim his victory at the 1990 Royal Rumble.
WrestleMania 6, would you say was the biggest night of your career?
Yeah.
Now I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself. At WrestleMania 6 later that year, with Hogan still the WWF champion and Royal Rumble winner, he moved on from his feud with Mr. Perfect and set his sights on the crazed Ultimate Warrior and his Intercontinental belt. A passing of the torch moment between the aging Hogan and his perceived successor, the Ultimate Warrior, who had grown to receive some of the biggest reactions in the company over the last year. An iconic title-for-title match which saw the new face of pro wrestling take on its greatest champion, new blood versus the established order, a changing of the guard and a special moment in pro wrestling history. Both Hogan and Warrior were wrestlers whose popularity arose from their charisma, energy and personality outside of the ring rather than their actions within it. Thus, the match in the main event of WrestleMania 6 was not a technical masterpiece of high-flying action and expert grappling. However, it is undeniable that when these two men came face to face, there was an electricity in the Toronto Dome that night, and the fans around the world could barely contain their excitement. When Ultimate Warrior eventually won, Hogan decided to personally hand over the title to him, a practice not commonly seen inside the ropes. Never missing an opportunity to grandstand and pose, yet again Hogan stole the limelight and very much overstayed his welcome, making the ending of the event more about his loss than the Ultimate Warrior's victory. In recent years, Hogan has gone on to say that the finish of the match and his passing of the torch was not his idea, and he would have liked to have handled the situation very differently. He said, WrestleMania 6, when he asked me to put the Warrior over, and I said, "That's no problem at all, brother. And my question always is, if I'm putting somebody over, what are we doing after that?" There wasn't really a clear-cut answer for that. I said, "How about this? When I put him over, I hand him the belt and everybody's cheering for him. I get halfway down the aisle and how about I just turn around and just drop him and drag him around the ring and just crucify him?" In my opinion, this shows that Hogan truly did only want the spotlight for himself, and even back then had suggested ideas which would only work to further his position at the end of WrestleMania 6, and further undermine the Ultimate Warrior's victory.
I mean, it started out bad, and just it progressively got worse.
When the time came for Hulk Hogan to pass the torch and be defeated by The Undertaker, Hogan didn't want to give up his beloved championship belt and place atop the WWF card without a fight. Obviously, he fought with The Undertaker in the ring, a classic match, but the fight also continued long after the bell. In the bout, Undertaker defeated Hogan when he landed a tombstone piledriver onto a steel chair in the ring, a crowning moment in the early career of a man who would go on to be one of the biggest names in wrestling over the next 30 years. But some bitterness seeped out of Hogan as he came crashing down in the ring. The Undertaker explained, "And when I tell you I had the brother secure, he was secure. Boom, I give him the tombstone. As soon as my knees hit, I hear, 'Oh, you got me, brother.' I'm so devastated, mortified, right? So they get Hogan out of the ring and I get the belt. I go backstage and I'm asking, where's Hulk at? Oh, he's laying on Vince's office floor. So I go in there and he's laying out on the floor. So now I'm in this precarious situation. I'm still a greenhorn. And now I've got to confront the face of wrestling, the biggest draw ever. I was like, Terry, I watched it back. Your head never hit. He's like, well, brother, you had me so tight that when we came down, I had nowhere to move. And that's what jammed my neck, because I couldn't move at all. It was too tight. Then I knew.
I was like, okay. Then I knew, I was like, okay. I kind of realized, okay, I know what you're all about.
The fake injury from Hogan could have ended The Undertaker's career then and there. It could have prevented anyone from ever wanting to work with him again, and could have seen the tombstone piledriver, arguably Undertaker's most iconic move, banned from use in the WWF. Hogan's head didn't hit the chair or the canvas during the move, as you can clearly see, nor did Hulk receive a life-shortening neck injury as he claimed. He was lying.
Shane's right there telling me, he's like, Mark, he goes, his head wasn't anywhere close to touching that mat.
If we could take a look at the camel's hooves.
It was 1991, and at the time, The US and Iraq were in the midst of the Gulf War, and tensions were extremely high between the two nations. The WWF once again proved that they weren't above using any sensitive topic in order to draw a crowd, having turned their returning All-American hero Sergeant Slaughter into a Yankee-hating Iraqi sympathizer and dedicated follower of the Iraq leader Saddam Hussein. They placed Slaughter as the leader of a newly formed group known as the Triangle of Terror, with General Adnan and eventually the Iron Sheik as Colonel Mustafa. The hatred that these three men received when appearing at shows meant that anyone who faced off against them instantly had the support of the American audience. After winning the 1991 Royal Rumble, Hogan headed backstage where he was interviewed by Gene Okerlund. During the segment, news was brought to Hulk's attention that the new WWF champion Sergeant Slaughter and General Adnan were celebrating their defeat of the Ultimate Warrior by destroying Hulk's beloved American flag. This sent Hogan into a patriotic rage where he promised to defeat Slaughter at WrestleMania for the WWF title and for the honour of the American people. Before the event, Hulk promised fans that as soon as he had destroyed the Triangle of Terror and taken the American WWF Championship back from these evil foreigners, Iraq would concede to the US and bow out of the conflict in the Gulf. The heat of the event drew so much controversy that although it was originally scheduled to take place in the 100,000-seat Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum, the stadium was deemed too large to protect from any potential backlash it may receive. WWF stated that due to a bomb threat and the inability to guarantee the fans' safety, they would move the event to the nearby Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena with its ability to hold the 16,000 crowd attendance. However, in recent years it has become evident that the reason WWF moved the show was not the security threat, but largely in part due to the poor ticket sales for the event, with an estimated 10,500 paying for a ticket to see the show, and a further 5,000 seats being filled by those with a free ticket. In the main event of WrestleMania 7, Superstars and Stripes Forever, Hogan defeated Slaughter to win the WWF Championship and celebrated with the people of America in the face of their real-life enemies, the Iraqi government. Hulk Hogan declaring himself as the reason to why the US and the coalition forces defeated Iraq and liberated Kuwait is a disgrace. It is a spit in the face to the hundreds of soldiers who have lost their lives in an attempt to restore freedom and democracy to the Middle East. It takes away from the efforts of the thousands of men and women who bravely fought for what they considered to be the right option and stood against Iraq's oppression. By the 15th of March 1991, America and the coalition forces had removed the Iraqi forces from Kuwait and handed power to a Kuwaiti democratic government. By the time WrestleMania 7 took place 9 days later, the whole war was already at an end. I can appreciate that Hogan's character is and always was as patriotic as it's possible to be. I understand the idea that his confidence in the US's victory in the Middle East was probably reassuring to small children watching at the time, heck, even some adults too, but there is something so dark and twisted in the idea that a simple, meaningless pro wrestling show would attempt to ramp up the emotion of an event which wasn't selling well by using the real-life deaths of an ongoing war. It was at this time that Hogan began to spread his entertainment wings and starred in a number of movies over the next few years. His original popularity had spawned from his excellent performance in Rocky III, so why couldn't he return to acting and further progress his career? From Mr. Nanny to Santa with Muscles, Hogan never appeared as the lead role in a single film, which was praised by critics. Most failed miserably at the box office and brought little to no profit when they made it to their home video releases. So you can imagine that with his unprecedented success in the world of pro wrestling, Hogan would simply move on from his failed endeavours as a leading man on the silver screen and return to his role in the ring. But no, Hulk decided to push on, something which I oddly respect from him. Failing at something new isn't a bad thing if you can pick yourself back up, learn from your mistakes and get better. Then all the best to you. But Hogan didn't do this either. He simply continued on with his terrible films, delivering poor acting performances with incredible consistency, and when he failed to ever have a box office success, he reverted to what he knows best: lying. He explained, "The reason why my movies didn't do as well as they should have done is because, in my early 20s, a Hollywood producer came on to me, and I rejected him. I was blackballed ever since." A statement which I cannot confirm nor deny. I must always attempt to believe the victim in these types of cases, and if this situation is true, then I feel bad for Hogan. But the fact is, he wasn't blackballed from Hollywood. He acted in dozens of roles over the years, and their lack of success measured up perfectly with his lack of talent. Going back to Mr. Nanny and Santa with Muscles, Hogan even lied about those two releases, stating that he completely rewrote the script for both films, but was denied the writer's credit by the Hollywood Writers Guild. Firstly, I've read Hogan's autobiographies, and I know for a fact that even with a ghostwriter, he has the writing prowess of a man who spent 30 years getting dropped on his head. Secondly, and most importantly, why would you ever want to take credit for either of those films? This is a lie I think I will never truly understand. Wouldn't it be so funny if a masculine alpha male had to look after some children? That would be so funny. I think it's really funny when men have to take time out from going to the gym and going into a bar and having a fight in order to take care of children. It's just so funny. Don't you think it's funny? Oh, you don't? You don't? Oh, okay. Well, yeah, don't ever watch Mr. Nanny from 1993 then, because that is the only joke throughout the entire film, and it goes over and over and over. It sucks. If you want to see a film about mischievous children who play pranks on their babysitter in order to gain attention of their parents, in a film with high production values and a heartwarming narrative, watch Nanny McPhee. If you want to see children who are ignored by their parents and end up having to use crazy plans and inventive traps in order to protect their home from a bunch of slapstick villains, then watch Home Alone. If you want to see a man out of his depth and struggling to learn the subtle nuances of everyday childcare, watch Mr. Mum. Mr. Nanny is an hour and a half full of over-the-top comic book style action. Considering it's aimed solely at young children, the movie becomes a lot more chaotic and violent than I'd expected before watching. But even those moments of explosive mayhem didn't really entice me, and I think that most people would feel about the same. The story is interesting enough to grab your attention, but the bare skeletal bones of the basic plot isn't enough to ever consider recommending this movie. It's bad throughout and holds extraordinary little significance in the modern day too.
They were worried about losing sponsors and network support.
Is that the most painful thing in terms of the fallout?
It was tough.
Most of us think of professional wrestling as harmless entertainment and Hulk Hogan as the king of the ring. But was there a sinister side to his success? Some people now claim that his hard-muscled good guy image really came from his past use of dangerous drugs.
The kids are believing that if they take their vitamins and say their prayers, that they're going to grow up to be some super athlete. Well, I got news for you. You can take your vitamins and you can say your prayers, but you're never going to grow up to be 300 pounds with 24-inch arms unless you take steroids.
Industry icons such as Lex Luger have spoken out about the pressures of being an athlete or a performer in pro wrestling. In sports, the saying is, the ends justify the means. We are taught that since we were little. Do whatever you've got to do to win, to be the best. Step over, step on, and step through. That is how all these performance-enhancing drugs got into our culture, and that leads to guys wanting to take shortcuts and then cheat until you get caught, and then lie. In 1991, the use of steroids in pro wrestling came into the zeitgeist in the US when, on the Arsenio Hall show, WWF's biggest icon Hulk Hogan was forced to sweat and squirm through an uncomfortable televised interview about his involvement with substance abuse and PEDs. For more, I'd like to cut to my friend Nostalgia, who has a bit more information on the subject.
Touted as the most recognizable wrestling star of all time, Hulk Hogan was a living, breathing superhero come to life. And you know what? I bought into it. Still do. Hulk Hogan was my childhood idol. His motto of train, say your prayers, and eat your vitamins inspired millions of kids and adults alike. Hell, he even had his own brand of children's vitamins.
Yay! Hulk Hogan Vitamins, the new champion of children's chewables. You've got my name on it.
Now, the Hulkster was never the best wrestler in the ring. What he was, though, was a larger-than-life character, complete with his massive 24-inch pythons.
My hero, your hero, everybody's hero!
In the 1980s, Hogan's physique was incredible, as was much of the WWF at that time. The World Wrestling Federation was known for its beefy roster filled with chiseled muscle men, a stark contrast to what the average wrestler looks like today. Much of this was due to the lifestyle of the 1980s, which consisted of anabolic steroids. It wasn't until Congress passed the Anabolic Steroid Act of 1990 that the use of steroids became a true faux pas, aka illegal. Under much scrutiny, the WWF was forced to clean up its act, which saw the rise of smaller athletes like Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels. But during the transition, the WWF and its owner, Vince McMahon, was indicted for steroid trafficking. And in the midst of it all, a Pennsylvania physician named George Zahorian was convicted of illegal steroid distribution. Among his patients was none other than the ultimate good guy, Hulk Hogan. Hogan for years had such a wholesome image that the mere thought of him taking illegal steroids was headline news.
He is the king of the ring, but many former wrestlers say it wasn't prayers and vitamins that made Hulk Hogan a giant in the eyes of kids.
I myself personally have injected Hulk Hogan with anabolic steroids.
And despite his peers telling him not to, Hogan decided to appear on the Arsenio Hall show to discuss the rumors. Many believed that this was the Hulkster's time to come clean. Instead, he denied, and did a piss-poor job of doing so.
But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
Hogan later admitted to his lies, but the incident took a toll on his reputation. This begs the question, how can you tell when someone, like the Hulkster, is lying? Well, let's break it down and show some of the obvious signs and use the Hulkster for reference. Number 1, a liar may repeat words or phrases. In this case, Hogan basically repeats the word basically over and over again.
Basically, I saw Lyle out here. Well, no, basically, I would. So basically, well, basically, basically, I'd rather not comment on that. So that's what happened to me. Basically, okay. And basically, it's basically, but basically, well, basically, I've learned a whole heck of a lot about speculation.
Basically, repetition is a way to convince you and others of a lie. Imagine saying, I didn't, over and over again. After a while, you can validate that lie in your own mind. In addition, liars may have trouble speaking clearly without flubbing their words. Hogan was a master promo, but he's clearly struggling here for sure.
Gosh, I don't know. The only way...
Don't mention specifically.
No. The only way to get these stories apparently is from doctors. And I mean, you know, I don't know what the government's going to do. I don't know if they're going to go after the guys that use them now or where they're going to go with this thing. But everybody needs to realize you can't get these things unless you get them from a doctor.
Number 2, a liar's body language may change. In some cases, the liar may stand rigid and still. In other cases, they may move around. The key is to spot an irregularity. Look at how when asked questions, the Hulk has problems getting comfortable.
So basically what I'd like to do is, with all due respect, inform you and everybody else that's misinformed by the newspapers.
Yeah, come on now, because I'm already nervous. I'm talking to a man about
straighten it up right now.
And number 3, a liar may provide too much information. If you find that somebody is going on and on, giving you too much information, things that you don't even need to know about, just an excess of details, it's likely because they are lying. Here, Hogan rambles, provides details from past injuries, and even reveals an old Little League photo to show his size.
And basically, this isn't the Lyle Alzado story you're going to hear out here.
Right.
Because, like the picture, do you have the picture? The picture that I showed you when I was 10 years old?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Sammy, show that picture because it's an amazing picture.
Okay, that's me when I was 10 years old.
Listen, I don't want to shit on the Hulkster too much. I loved that guy. And truthfully, I can kind of excuse his steroid use. Now, some of his more recent scandals, they are a bit harder to overlook. But that's for another video. Brother.
This is not cheating. Not when everyone does it.
As we see, Hogan decided to lie his way through the interview, stating he'd never taken steroids and that the only way to make it to the top like him was through hard work. Oh, brother.
One of these little dudes out there that's been training, saying his prayers and eating his vitamins, someday he's going to knock me off.
David Schultz, a fellow pro wrestler and companion of Hulk Hogan, said, "I injected Hogan well over 100 times. I regularly gave him shots in the triceps where he couldn't reach himself, and also a few times in the butt."
All you should do is come out and tell them the truth. Quit lying to them. Tell them the truth and be man enough to tell them the truth, and say, hey, I did steroids and, I've done them for years and years.
Another who, before his death, was outspoken about steroid use in pro wrestling and his involvement was the Ultimate Warrior, Jim Hellwig. If I had to relate anything to the lifestyle, it would be to point out how the demands of pro wrestling differ from the lifestyle of any other organised sports pro athletes. There is no season, you go year round, and with the travel you do, you can fall into a bad habit of burning the candles at both ends. It's easy to fall into a habit of abusing stimulants and painkillers to cover up for lackluster energy. Bottom line is, there are differences between use and abuse, and it's obvious that many guys cross the line. As the Ultimate Warrior seemingly struggled to balance his unrealistic expectations of his body, his public perception, and the pressure from WWE, fractures began to appear between Jim Hellwig and the pro wrestling behemoth. Vince McMahon, since Hellwig's passing, commented, "Warrior's experiments with growth hormones were the reason, but the steroids use was another big factor for the Ultimate Warrior's death." In 1991, Hellwig's relationship with WWE was further tarnished when Vincent McMahon was charged with routinely obtaining anabolic steroids by the US attorney in New York. The pro wrestler's use of performance enhancers was put under a very public spotlight for the first time, as witnesses from the wrestling world were called to stand to testify.
Oh, my brother, testify!
In 1994, the WWF's biggest star, industry icon Hulk Hogan, testified not only that he had tried steroids, but that he had in fact been a regular steroid user for over 14 years. His defense was that he had been told the substances were above board and as a licensed doctor had given them to him.
Dr. George Zahorian was the ringside physician for the Pennsylvania Athletic Commission. Last June, he went on trial for illegally selling steroids to professional wrestlers. Hulk Hogan was called to testify, but was excused at the last minute. Dr. Zahorian testified he had treated Hulk Hogan for a serious steroid abuse problem with success. Hogan says he only used steroids 3 times for treatment of an injury and under a doctor's careful supervision.
I think the mindset changed around 1990 when it became illegal. There was an era when it wasn't just steroid use in the WWE, but it was predominant in every single sport across the board. Every sport in the world was doing it. The mindset was, it was safer than taking sugar. At that time, every wrestler I knew was taking part in steroid use in WWE. I'm sure Hulk Hogan in his head thought if he denied extensive steroid use in the WWE in 1991, the media would move on. Who would have ever thought his denial would cause a steroid media buzz which attacked wrestling so fierce with major ramifications? Desirable TV time slots were lost, merchandise died in retail stores, sponsors left in droves, the fan base dwindled. Did you take a shower? Yeah. Did you brush your teeth? Yeah. Did you take your steroids? Yeah. That was the deal. It was how I lived.
everything changed in a short amount of time, and I had a chance to take the high road or the low road.
First of all, going into WrestleMania 9, the plan was for Yokozuna to be our champion for the immediate future. That changed the weekend of WrestleMania, said Bruce Pritchard. The reasoning was because of the international tour we had coming up. It was going to be Hulk's farewell tour in a lot of respects, and we felt it would be better to have Hulk as the champion. At WrestleMania 9, the main event was Bret Hart versus Yokozuna. The match was short and certainly nothing to write home about, but before it was even finished, Hulk made his way to the ring, demanded a match with Yokozuna, and beat him in seconds, stealing the limelight at the end of another big show. He later lied on a handshake and screwed Bret with McMahon. Hulk promised to drop the belt to Hart and then said, "He isn't in my league, he can't lace my boots up," behind Bret's back, later dropping the belt instead to Yokozuna at SummerSlam. Hart confronted the pair, who told him that that's just what you thought you heard, when Hart reminded them of the deal they had previously both agreed to. It was my harebrained idea, and it caused quite a controversy. It was one of those audible Wild Wild West type situations. So Hogan had lost faith with the wrestlers and promoters in WWF and been widely rejected by a huge swathe of its fanbase. He needed a way out, a way to reignite his career and take Hulkamania in a different direction. He could no longer return to Japan. He was still at odds with the Yakuza and under threat of death if he were ever to return to the country. Hogan had injured beloved Japanese wrestling icon Antonio Inoki so severely during a match that Inoki had been declared dead by paramedics, only to be revived and his life saved moments later via CPR. With Japanese wrestling fans at the time still certain of the reality of pro wrestling, they took Hogan's almost deadly assault seriously and thus called in their version of the Japanese mafia for retribution. Hogan said, "I actually killed Antonio Inoki in the ring, but they brought him back to life with CPR. I couldn't leave Japan for a while because the fans and the Japanese mafia wanted to have me killed because Inoki is so well loved over there." But of course, none of that is true. Just another wild lie told by Hogan to add to the pile. Antonio Inoki never suffered as much as an injury during one of the pair's bouts, let alone succumbing to death at the hands of the Hulkster. I mean, come on, look at this man. I don't think it would be possible to kill him in the ring even if you tried, let alone unintentionally. And you may think that a lie involving the murder of an in-ring opponent and a run-in with the Yakuza is such a massive lie that it would stand out and be remembered by all those who have even a passing interest in Hulk Hogan and pro wrestling. But the lie isn't the biggest that Hogan ever told. It isn't even the most ridiculous lie about Japan. Hogan claimed on the WWE DVD Hulk Still Rules the Japanese wrestling machine and 6-time IWGP heavyweight champion Tatsumi Fujinami attempted to fight him for real during one of their matches whilst Hogan was the WWF champion, and that Fujinami's aim was to legitimately pin Hogan against the script and steal the title belt from him. Hogan states that he had to go into full shoot mode and beat Fujinami in a real contest and retain his title. From all my research, there is no solid evidence during any of the pair's in-ring meetings that this ever occurred. The televised matches appear to all follow a pre-arranged script, and if the match Hogan was talking about wasn't taped, then what would have been the benefit of Fujinami attempting to take the belt from him? And nobody would have seen it, and thus nobody would have known that Hogan had lost. It just makes very little sense to me. Hogan claimed that in February of 1993, he sat next to a fellow wrestler and WWE Hall of Famer Kerry Von Erich on a long plane flight from LA to a wrestling show in Japan, talking about life and the business for the entire journey. 3 days later, after the flight, Von Erich sadly killed himself with a gunshot to the chest at his father's estate in Texas. A truly horrendous event, and one which affected so many in the pro wrestling community at the time, which, in my opinion, makes Hogan's lie on the subject even more disgusting. See, the pair were never sat on a flight from LA to Japan 3 days before Von Erich's death. Neither man was in Japan in February of '93. Hogan didn't appear that year in Japan until May. Kerry Von Erich never even travelled to Japan that entire year. So why did Hogan lie? But still, through all of these awful twistings of the truth, they still aren't Hogan's most ludicrous lie about his time in Japan. That would have to be this one. Because of the time difference between the US and Japan, the travel back and forth meant that I worked 400 days in 1 year. To really blow your mind, think about this. If I say I wrestled 400 days a year, it's no exaggeration. My years were actually longer than 365 days. The American audience had no idea that I was wrestling in Japan during the whole Hulkamania thing. There were times when I'd fly back and forth to Japan twice a week just to wrestle. Now it was nothing to wrestle in Madison Square Garden one day, then fly all the way to the Egg Dome in Tokyo the same day, because you'd gain 14 hours, and then fly back to the West Coast. So I could wrestle in Japan today, and then fly back across the international dateline and land in another town yesterday. I was constantly adding days to my years. Now, put aside the fact that Hogan never wrestled in Japan and the US in the same day, nor the same week, and only once or twice even in the same month. His exaggeration on the topic in the light of everything else I can forgive. Maybe he misspoke and meant 400 appearances in a year, but that isn't true either. But 400 days in a year, gaining 14 hours. This isn't how time works. That isn't how any of this works. It's a lie based off of a misunderstanding, and if it wasn't so pathetic, it would be more hilarious. Hogan had a couple of excellent runs in Japan. He had some of the best matches of his career against the likes of Antonio Inoki and the Great Muta. The Japanese fans even refer to him as Ichiban or Number One. So why does he need to lie about something which anyone with half a working brain can see as false? Hogan formed a band, this time named Hulk Hogan and the Wrestling Boot Band, which featured longtime friend Mouth of the South Jimmy Hart, his then wife Linda, and collaborator JJ Maguire. The quartet, fronted by Hogan, released a CD titled Hulk Rules. The 10-track album, which mixes in terrible renditions of pop, rock, and even some rap, featured such classic and memorable hits as Hulkster's in the House, Hulkster's Back, Hulk's the One, Hulkster in Heaven, and Hulk Rules. I think it's fairly obvious what the focus of the band was, simply to fulfill the musical dreams of said Hulkster and provide a platform to further grow his fame outside of pro wrestling. Now this one's pretty sad. In the only song in which Hogan sings on the album, called Hulkster in Heaven, the themes revolve around a young Hulk Hogan fan who died. The lyrics, according to Hogan's autobiography, were written to honour a boy who had attended a WWF show at Wembley in 1992. To see his favourite wrestler Hogan, but sadly, he passed away before the end of the event. In his autobiography, Hogan writes, "He was supposed to be sitting ringside, but I went out to wrestle and I didn't see him there. After the match, I came back and said, 'Where's the kid?' They told me, 'Oh, he died before the match got underway.'" Hogan goes on to say that immediately following the terrible news, he and Jimmy Hart went backstage and began to write the lyrics to Hulkster in Heaven as a way of dealing with the trauma, and had the idea to give the proceeds from the song to the family of the deceased boy, who Hogan explained were dealing with medical costs, something which may have led to his untimely death. The lyrics of the song show Hogan's pain when he sings, I wish Hulk's love could bring you back. When the Hulkster comes to heaven, we'll tag up again. And the emotional lines, I used to tear my shirt, but now you tore my heart. I knew you were a Hulkamaniac right from the start. The death of a child can affect families and friends who may never overcome the sadness of their loss. A truly dark and emotional tale, I'm sure you agree. The fact that Hogan went above and beyond to help out financially is, in my opinion, is a real act of honour in my books. Or it would be. If any of what I just told you is true, in 1992, WWF put on several shows at Wembley in London, none of which featured Hulk Hogan in any capacity at all. Furthermore, JJ Maguire has dispelled these lies, explaining how he wrote the song with Hogan in 1994, 2 years after this story is supposed to have taken place. We don't even pay for our medical expenses in the UK, so what was all the medical bills that he was giving the money to the kid to pay for? Hulk didn't wrestle at Wembley in 1992, he didn't meet a sickly fan before the match, who later sadly died, and he didn't give any of the proceeds from the album to anyone except those in the band and, of course, himself. He lied to make himself look better and to make more money, and he did it at the expense of the feelings of families who have lost a loved one. It's that simple.